Radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Good evening. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Today is Thursday. That's right. It's Thursday, November 2nd, 2023. Really looking forward to tonight's show because we've got Dr. Irena Scott with us. We're going to be talking about, it's favorite is the wrong word. I'm going to say one of my most compelling UFO ET abduction cases. And of course, I'm talking about 1973 Pascagoula. Charles Hickson, Calvin Parker, fishing. And we're going to go through all of that tonight. Irena is probably the one person on this planet that knows as much about this case. And so we're going to be going through all of that tonight, and her knowledge and research and the amount of books that she has written on the subject. We can go in a lot of different directions, and we're going to be doing that tonight. I want to remind everybody, coming up next weekend, that is November 10th, 11th, and 12th, Stairway to the Stars at the Luxor in Las Vegas, Nevada. We've got over 60 speakers, huge presentation there at the Luxor Hotel. We're going to be going to Area 51. We've got 4 buses we're taking out there. We've got a full weekend of events scheduled. So head over to disclosurefest.org. The links for that are below. There's also a discount promo code for you to get discounts on your tickets. Look at the schedule of events and everything that we've got going on. It's a really big weekend. So I'll see everybody next weekend. Somehow I made it to today. It's been a very busy year, as everybody knows, but I made it to today. I got to the end of the week. I'm excited about, of course, Irena being here, but then tomorrow I get to work on Luxor, as well as the shows that we've got booked for next week. But I finally made it to this weekend. I haven't had a true weekend off, even though I'm working all weekend. I'm actually at home this weekend, and it seems like it's truly been months since I have been able to do this. So let's get tonight started here. I want to jump into it. We've got a very busy night in front of us. Dr. Irena Scott, she received her Ph.D. I want you to check all of this and listen, okay? She received her Ph.D. from the College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Missouri, did post-doctoral research at Cornell University, and has had a professorship at St. Bonaventure University. The Defense Intelligence Agency, that's right, the DIA, employed her in Ph.D. level GS-11 research in satellite photography, including the Air Order of Battle section of its Photographic Interpretation Office, which involved aircraft identification with above top secret sensitive compartmented information SCI clearances. She was employed as a physical scientist cartographer in what is now the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency using satellite photography, and she worked at Battelle Memorial Institute. She has been sent for work-related purposes to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and has been in the secured areas, including the Blue Room NASIC building. She was an astronomer at the Ohio State University Radio Observatory Big Ear. That is incredible to me, and was a correspondent for Popular Mechanics magazine. Whew, what a life. Her website, irenascott.com, is below. Check out all of her books. She's very prolific. But with that, I'm going to say, good evening, Irena. How are you?
Just fine. How are you? Thank you for inviting me.
You know, that's a pretty intense CV, young lady. And I'm not going to disclose anything, but I know that you're a neighbor of my mom. So therefore, you are in the vicinity of, a pretty sensitive area in the country. Does that have anything to do with where you live now? In other words, are you still working for the man?
Oh yes, I'm. Working for all kinds of. Actually, I'm working for the aliens.
You were that, yeah. So you flipped.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
You flipped. Before we get started, you get the first time guest disclaimer, which is this. Irena, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where that conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends, it ends. But we're going to end as friends. We're already friends, but we're going to end as friends anyway. But you have to accept.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to start here. I want to talk about you and your background because your career sounds very fun, but very intense and very intellectual, very brainy. The opposite of my life, I should say. But I want to push back before that. And so let's do that now. But I have one question. Do you still carry a security clearance? Are you obligated by any NDA, or are you free to talk about anything tonight?
So far as I know, I mean, if I knew anything secret, I wouldn't say it, but I don't have any security clearance or anything.
Okay, so you've never divulged secrets? You've never.
Well, when I worked for the DIA, I didn't divulge anything. I was supposed to disappear, but Yeah,
right. You're here with me now, so I guess you're in the clear. But let's back up because your work and your research into ET contact and abductions, it's second to none. But before that, it seems like you were on an intellectual path. Well, you still are, but you understand what I'm saying, that career path. Did you have an interest in UFOs and contact, or did you see something strange in the sky that kind of pointed you in another direction?
Well, I always wanted to be an astronomer. And since I was a tiny child, and I was blocked, I majored in it in college, but I was blocked because they didn't hire females. And so I went into cartography because they were mapping planets. And then I kept on trying to get in astronomy and not getting there. And so I wound up in the DIA, which didn't get me any closer to astronomy. So I got married, and I moved to where my husband lived, which is Las Vegas. And he actually had worked for Area 51 way back, but that's why we were there. But I started working for the College of University of Las Vegas, and they didn't have an astronomy department, so I was lucky enough to get a master's and then get a Ph.D. from the veterinary school, and then I went on from there in that profession. But I'd rather be an astronomer. And so I always had the interest.
That's a weird PhD. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm sure you scratch your head too as well, right? To go from veterinary into the career path of satellites and aircraft and top secret clearances, I don't see the connection. But apparently there must have been one.
Well, they didn't hire females in a lot of subjects.
Well, so, can I interrupt you? I just did like 3 times, but let me jump in. Some of the biggest discoveries of the universe were from women. And Edwin Hubble, right, who is credited with the expansion of the universe, right? Okay, and changed Albert Einstein's mind. That wasn't Edwin Hubble. That was his assistant that made that discovery. But she was a woman, and there were so many female astronomers out there that didn't get the credit because of the male-dominated field. I hope that one day we get that corrected. But to hear that from you, you're absolutely right. And we can talk about it in any industry, but in physics and astronomy, it was harsh.
Oh, I remember I used to go to job fairs, and they would have like rooms that say, like for physics and astronomy, things like that, say male only. And if I walked in, they would throw me out just like I was, doing something illegal.
And here in the United States, as crazy as that sounds, everything that we just said, I just got back from the Middle East last week. And this is what happens, and it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing because we're so used to our culture over here, okay? Over there, you go into an airport, any airport, they separate the men from the women when you go through the security checks. And it's like men, they can, right? Women over there, men over here. And now, if you're from the Middle East, you just do it, right? But you see the confusion of the look on, people that are experiencing this for the first time. It's such an offensive thing to see. And we take things for granted here in the United States. I'm telling you right now, head outside of the country and see what really goes on. It's bizarre.
It wasn't too thrilling back then. It's a lot better now, but it's a little too late for me.
Okay, but you didn't answer the question, believe it or not. Did you ever see something strange in the skies growing up?
Yeah, it was. It wasn't in the sky. It was in our room. It was when my sister and I were real small children. We both remember it, but I woke up and my sister was in a bed on the other side of the room, and I didn't know she was awake. But there was this thing flying around the room, and nothing like I had ever seen before. It was just a tiny little thing, sort of shaped like an actual Tic Tac, which is in today's news, but like a real one. And sort of like the shade of hot iron. And it would fly around the room. And after a while, I noticed that the room was dark and there was no storm going on. I noticed that it knew where things were. I mean, it would go toward a wall and then it'd turn before it, bumped into a wall, and it'd avoid the furniture and stuff. And it got close to us several times. And so I thought, I think my sister was about 4 and I may have been about 6, but we might have been younger because I don't know if I was in school yet. And she said she wasn't in school. But after a while, it flew up toward the ceiling, and then it turned and it flew along the ceiling. And then it was an attic room, and the walls came together at the top with about 3 feet in between. And there was a chandelier in the middle of the room that was turned off. Wood got just a certain distance from the chandelier and began to circle it, just like it knew where it was, and it didn't bump into any walls or anything. Then it just came down a spiral under it. And when it just got about exactly right under the lamp, both of us became terrified, and I didn't know she was even awake and seeing it. And we both went screaming out of the room, and we were so terrified we bumped into each other and fell down the stairs. And then we couldn't get the door open. And finally we got the door open. We went screaming to our parents, and they didn't believe us.
Of course not.
Yes.
Of course not. Of course not. I'm a dad. I always wanted my daughters to come in and say that they saw a ghost. I always wanted my daughters to say, my secret invisible friend. I never got that as a parent. I didn't have, it was weird. I didn't have to deal with it. I had plans for it, but I never had to deal with that. And what does that tell you as a scientist and as somebody with a doctorate? Is it just that? Are we not understanding what is really out there in the world. We only exist and see this 2 or 3D existence, but there's something else going on. Is that what that tells you?
What it took me a long time to understand it, because we never heard of UFOs or anything. And even years later, when we heard of UFOs, we were in the country and on a farm with, no TV or anything. And even when we heard about UFOs, we thought they were like airplanes. So we didn't think of it being in our room. But then later I read a book by, what's her name?
Nah, don't worry about it.
But anyway, she said,
it'll come to you.
She said that children that have UFO experiences as adults often have experience with small orbs when they're young, and that happened to both of us. And then we had other experiences. And Jenny Randall's is who I meant to say.
Yeah, Jenny, she's amazing.
It's a book. And so it was, we didn't know it for years, but it was probably a UFO experience way back then.
Somebody reaching out. And the journey, it's always about the journey. It's not necessarily the moment. It's where you are today. Did you see this life path in front of you? Did you have a calling? Did you know that you were going to go down this road? Was there any indication of that?
No, I just wanted to be an astronomer, and I wanted to go into science and do research. And it might have influenced me, but I was in science, so it wasn't something I went around talking about, especially often I was the only female in the place where I worked. And so I did not say I see UFOs, because, scientists say that doesn't exist. But then when I got closer to retirement, I sort of came out of the UFO closet a little bit. No,
it felt good, didn't it? Tell me the truth. It felt good. It felt good. But if we back up with your interest in astronomy, I'm going to ask you this really quick, and then we're going to move on to Pascagoula and other things. But if we back up to 1952 and we look at Enrico Fermi and his famous quote, attributed to the Fermi Paradox today, of course, at Los Alamos in the cafeteria discussing all of these flying saucers and stuff, and he throws up his hands and he says, the universe must be teeming with life, but where is everybody, right? Well, that was 1952, and I don't think he would say that today. The reason is, with astronomy and the research that we are able to do, especially in the last 20 years, we now know that every star in the observable universe, which includes our Milky Way, has at least one planet. And we didn't know that in 1952. Enrico didn't know that in 1952. Nobody knew that in 1952. We thought our star system was unique. But now we know that there are literally trillions to infinity amount of planets out there, right? And how does that feel to you, wanting to be an astronomer, that those questions have been answered?
Well, I think the government was rejecting the idea of UFOs or anything like that back then, because they thought we were the only planets in the universe and all that. But astronomy has changed a lot since then. And I think most people, the public, is more open to the idea. I mean, I don't know if they're extraterrestrial or anything else. I don't know what they are. But, it's more open for things like that to exist and more probable than it was. And so I think the government's sort of being squeezed in by public opinion a little bit and changing their tune.
Yeah, just a little. And you're living an extraordinary life, and your books, and you're very prolific. But did you honestly ever see a day like where we are now? And certainly these last 5 years, where it's been crazy town with the media, the government, the DOD, NASA, the military and Congress and hearings. Did you ever see a day like this coming?
No, I can remember all these people that were investigating UFOs say there's never going to ever be a day like this. And then a lot of them died. And now, they didn't even get to see it. And I'm, around seeing it. So I'm pretty happy for the most part.
Except, I feel bad. Yeah, Stanton Friedman, he deserves to be here, right? James McDonald, Donald Kehoe. Yeah, they deserve to be able to take a victory lap right now. But we're talking about them now, and I hope they're listening, right? So that's where we're going to dovetail a little bit. If we go back to 1973 and Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, what ended up happening after that case, which we're going to get into the specifics of right now. But after that, those two became the brunt of jokes and stand-up comics and lines in movies and sitcom television. And we've all heard those jokes, right? Why do UFOs only go to a couple of dudes fishing in a swamp, right? Why don't they land in Los Angeles? And that was always a direct reference back to Charles and Calvin. And those two guys had to hear that. And that they heard it. And that they watched it. That's pretty tough. And the world wouldn't look at their case the same today, but times have changed, right? And how did Calvin not let that affect him, or did it?
Well, I'm sure it affected him a whole lot because he didn't talk about it for going on 50 years. And finally, his wife and Philip Mantle pulled him out of it, and he started talking about it. But you can imagine working with shipbuilders, that would not be a very good climate to say, I see UFOs. And the type of work he did wouldn't be a good idea to talk about it.
Yeah, let's do a little retrospective, if we will. Let's go back to 1973. Ironically, Irena, the encounter happened the day after my birthday, which it was on October 11th, 1973. My birthday is October 10th. And that right there for me gets my interest. Not that it's the day after my birthday, but it's a pretty cool reason to jump into a case for me, right? It's like right there. So let's go back to October 11th, 1973. And how did the evening start for those two?
Well, it was Calvin's first day at work. He was engaged, and he had several part-time jobs, and his father knew Charles Hickson and asked if he could get his son a normal type job, working 8 to 5 or whatever. And so they had gone through their day of work, and I talked to Charles's son, and he said that before any of that happened, that he'd ask his father, do UFOs exist? And his father said no, but he had a lot to find out later. And so anyway, they didn't have any perception or anything else. They were just going fishing. I mean, they weren't, UFO people or anything. And so they looked for a couple places, and then Calvin had a brand new car, and he was driving it. And Charles wanted to go to this one place, and so they stopped, and there were no trespassing signs up and everything. And they had to walk through this junky place with a lot of vegetation, and Calvin wasn't real thrilled about it, but they went, and they got on this pier and set their apparatus up and started fishing. Well, then they saw this blue thing, and it was kind of like the shade of a cop car. And Calvin told Charles that he could go to jail because it was his idea, and it was just Kelvin was innocent and everything. But it turned out to be much, much worse than police, because this thing levitated in. It didn't exactly fly. It just came in. It was a thing. I don't know if they really knew exactly the size, of like 30 feet in length or something. And it was kind of a bluish. And then there was a real bright light, and the thing seemed to open or something. There was this real bright light, and these three things came out, and two of them grabbed Charles, and one grabbed Kelvin and took him inside. And then they separated them, and they both had the feeling of the things gave them the impression that they were scanning him. Like one of them had, it was real bright and they couldn't see anything, but this thing came down on one of them and sort of scanned around his body. With the other one, he thought an eye was coming out of the wall, something just like an eye, and scanned them. And they were, as soon as the things grabbed them, they were paralyzed and they couldn't move, which would be really, really terrifying even by itself with nothing else. But they were being captured just like an animal and being put in this place. And so then they don't know how long or what all else happened. There might have been some other things happening. And then things put him back out on the pier. And Kelvin was just standing there with his arms out, just like he was in a trance or something. And Charles fell down and couldn't stand up. And then he got up and he sort of waked up Kelvin. And so that was the abduction, but it was just a terrifying, absolutely terrifying event.
Here's the thing. There were a bunch of firsts with Calvin and Charles' description of the events. There were a bunch there. And this was 1973. And prior to that, we have to remember, Travis Walton hadn't happened yet. We had Betty and Barney Hill. And unless you read the book or saw the movie, you didn't know about the case. We didn't have what we have today as far as media goes. And the other cases of abduction, again, you would have to chase these things down and check them out. Charles and Calvin's descriptions, Calvin described his abductor as a robot that was like stacked rings. Remember his description in the drawing that he did? And I always found that very strange. And because he didn't describe a little green man with antennas and big eyes, right? No, that's not what he did. He described him as the Michelin Man, and his drawings scared the crap out of me. The drawings of that I'm going to say robot. I don't have another word to use, Irena, but let's just stay there. We don't have any idea. But the description of the eyeball scanning, well, we see that today in hospitals. But that's technology that didn't happen for quite a while. And CT scans. Of course, we can talk about X-rays and things, but that's different. And they described the entire experience differently than anything that had happened before. And when you hear this coming from those two, does that? I don't want to say that it's a true story because of that, but it didn't have any context from a historical perspective. And how does that make you feel about their experience?
Well, if they were hoaxing, I think they'd kind of look up, what other people reported, like Betty Hill and Barney Hill. These were little things with kind of uniforms on or something. And like the Greys and things like that, the standard picture of a alien was different. And there were a whole lot of different things about their event because, for one thing, there were two of them. And like with a lot of abductions, it would take place out in the middle of nowhere with one person. And this time there were two. It was in a kind of a public place. I mean, it was dark, but there was a freeway going by not too far away and ships and things in the river. And then the beings were a whole lot different. They described them as, like you said, they were sort of like somebody had sort of formed something in a general picture of a human, like they had a head and body and arms that were different and sort of claw-like fingers. And when your head has protrusions, you have ears and a nose, well, they just had little things sticking out. It was like somebody just made a rough model of a person and said, well, that's close enough for government work. And so they didn't impress them as being beings and more like robots. And with the scanning type of thing, like today, if you do an MRI, they put you on a gurney and haul you in and stuff. And what they were saying looked like scanning then was just like a little iPhone or something, just a little tiny thing, which they don't even have today. And with the paralysis, back then, I think if you were put out in an operation, you were unconscious. And here they were conscious, but they couldn't move. And there were a lot of other things about that that just were totally unique and not reported before.
How long do they think that they were on board that ship?
I think it didn't sound like it was what they remembered was that long, but I think they said like 15 to 30 minutes, but they didn't know for sure because they didn't have watches.
That's right. And how we're going to circle back to this because there's a lot of details here. But how did the event end?
The event ended with they were put back on the pier, and the thing flew away and disappeared. And then at first they were just totally shook up, and they went back to the car. And it was a new car, and when they opened the passenger door, the window was shattered and it fell out. And then he couldn't get the car started. And it was a perfectly good car, which I don't understand any of that. And then they at first said, we're not going to tell anybody. Well, Calvin was 18 and he had his future life ahead of him. He was engaged. He wanted to get married. He didn't want, his fiance and her family to think he was crazy or anything. And he didn't want to get tormented the rest of his life. But Charles had been in the military in the Korean War, and he'd had life and death situations. And he probably thought that, compared to life and death situations, that being harassed wouldn't be that bad. And so he thought it was his responsibility to say something because he didn't know what was going on. He thought there might be an invasion or something else and that people should know about it. So I think they stopped at the newspaper office first and it was closed. Then they called the Kessler Air Base, and Kessler Air Base told them that Project Blue Book doesn't exist. They don't collect UFO reports or anything. And then, so it said to contact the local authorities. Well, so you can imagine how bad that would be 1973 to call in and say, well, we were just abducted by a UFO. Everybody think you were crazy. But Charles decided to do that. And the person at the sheriff's office, I guess, he said, I know you're going to think I'm crazy. You're not going to believe it, but this is what happened. And the guy that was answering the phone apparently could also hear Calvin begging and crying and saying, please don't say anything, and believed him and had them come into the sheriff's office. And then the sheriff did a real good investigation. Because
now, can I let me jump in right here. This is the part of the case. It's at this moment because the desk sergeant says, "Okay, all right, come on in." All right, so he does, and they do. While they were in the interview room, the police leave them alone, but leave a recorder running. And you can hear Calvin and Charles talking about the facts of the case and going back and forth about whether they should even be there talking about this. And that right there, it wasn't like they were trying to get their story straight or they were, you know what I mean? Or they were hoaxing. No, that's not what they were talking about. And that right there is the pivotal moment in this case for me. Before that, it is just two guys fishing in a swamp, right, with a story. But it's that moment in the interview room for me that breaks this wide open. Does that evidence do the same for you? Well,
I think they did. I think the sheriffs did an extremely good investigation that probably wouldn't be done today. They first of all interviewed them separately and got their stories, then put them in a room together with another interviewer who talked to them. Then the interviewer left, and they had the tape recorder there, which is because the police didn't want to get caught, in a hoax. And they wanted to test out whether they were hoaxing or not. Well, both of them were just going crazy at the time, just out of their minds in fear and, and everything else, because they'd just been through a horrible experience. It was like death. And I think Calvin said it was like dying. And so then on the secret tape, it came out that they were just, totally shook up. And so the police believed him, and that made a huge difference in everything because they were sincere. I mean, they thought this really happened.
Did you, you've listened to the tape, right? Yeah. What goes through your mind? I'm telling you right now, it's one of the scariest recordings I've ever heard. And to hear the fear, dude, they were panicked. They were, Calvin, I'm 60. I just turned 60 years old. Okay. Calvin's 18. When I was 18, I wouldn't have known how to deal with something like this. And you hear it in Calvin's voice. He was a kid. He was a baby, right? And to hear, he's exactly where his head should have been at a moment like that. That tape is about as chilling as it gets, isn't it?
Well, it wound up with him praying to God. He was so terrified.
The what happens next? Because I want to go back to the ship in a second. But what did the police end up doing?
Well, the police believed him after that, and then they went home and came back. They came to work the next day, and for some reason, the information got out that this had happened to him, and there were just tons of people and reporters and everything else around at work. And the boss called him in and said, "What did you people do?" And so the boss found out, and then they had they took him to one hospital and interviewed several people. Interviewed him, and then Kessler Air Force Base had rejected him at first, but both of them were worried about contamination and things, and so they took him to Kessler to find out, to test him out for radiation, different things, and they interviewed him for quite a while. And there's a transcript of the interview where they question him in great detail at Kessler, and big people like colonels and things were asking him questions, and just trying to find out everything they could, which was really great because they had several interviews just immediately afterwards, and they were conscious of everything. They remembered it, which a lot of people that apparently are abducted don't remember. And they both remembered it, but Kelvin didn't want to talk about it for quite a while. But the tape showed that he remembered it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And now a few things, like I said, I want to circle back to that night. But a few things happened after that. And I felt that, and it's just pop culture. It's just the time period. We have to go back and think about what 1973 was. It was TV shows like Laugh-In, right? And you know what I mean? We had it as a family. It was a different. We had 3 channels, 4 if you were lucky, and it was the Brady Bunch. It was Gilligan's Island. You know, it was a different world back then. And they looked at Calvin and Charles as characters instead of, you know, somebody, a pair of men that went through an abduction experience with ET, and it was never treated that way. And they were treated like celebrities and did TV shows and other things instead of taking their experience serious. And you can't blame those two, and you can't really blame the science side. It was just the way that we looked at this subject back then, right?
I guess. I think people are more open-minded now because of the change in astronomy and government taking it seriously and things. Back then, you couldn't prove anything, and so everybody'd say, "Well, you're lying."
Yeah, and that includes like Philip Glass coming in, you know, who poked. Yeah. Thank you, Irena. Who came in and intentionally with malice would attack people's character, intentionally with malice knock holes in the story, and would intentionally with malice, you know, attempt to ruin people's lives. And he did exactly that with those two.
Yeah, and he didn't investigate at all. He just said, well, this is so, and this is so, and this is so. And, you know, he didn't even, you know, go down and talk to him or do any form of investigation at all. And he always acted like he was a scientist. I mean, they'd, you know, say, well, you know, these people saw something, I mean, in general. And then they'd have Phil Klass come in, and he'd say, well, this is a scientific opinion. Well, Phil Klass wasn't a scientist. And two perfectly good scientists did talk to Charles and Kelvin. I mean, Dr. Harder and Dr. Heinik, who both were professors in good universities. Heinik was a top astronomer. And they both said these people are sincere. And, you know, they went down and talked to him and things, which Phil Klass didn't do anything, and he wasn't a scientist.
Well, so how did you? Because we're gonna stay right here. How did you decide to get involved with this case?
Something happened to me on that date. I was living in Missouri, and my mother was in Ohio, which is about 600 miles away. And I got a phone call from my mother, who said, "Did you hear that explosion?" And I thought she just flipped her wig. I mean, she's a real skeptical, sane person. And, you know, I told her, she had always said that if we thought she was getting dementia, we should tell her. And so anyway, I told her, you know, go to the insane asylum. It's all over with, Mom, you know. And anyway, but she kept on saying, "Did you hear that explosion?" I thought it was so funny. And then later she called and said that there was just a huge UFO wave going on, that people were keeping their kids in and people stayed in at night, and this UFO had chased her best friend and all kinds of things. Well, I didn't think about it again for several years. And later I was working at Ohio State University, and they had a newspaper room with real newspapers, tons of them. And for some reason, just on a lark, I decided to go in and see if I could find information on when she told me about that sound. And I walked in a room, and it was like something from Indiana Jones, like a vault of 1,000,000 papers. And I didn't even know when it was, but I just made a guess it was the middle of October in 73. And I walked over to the papers, and I thought, I'll never find this. But I did. And it was October the 11th, 1973. And I got interested in that for some reason and studied it scientifically and wrote a thing for a scientific journal and submitted it. Well, the state seismologist of Ohio contacted me, and he was interested too. And he helped me find seismograph records and that sort of thing. And I actually wrote it up in a scientific journal. And so it happened the same time, maybe even the same time. It happened the same night, maybe even the same time as the abduction. And so I had, my own experience then. But at that time, I paid no attention to the abduction, didn't have any interest in it. But then years later, I had published some books with Philip Mantle. And he was then working with Calvin. He wanted somebody in the United States to talk to the witnesses because he was in Europe and he got, he had an accent and they had an accent down there and all that. And he would get the time mixed up and everything. And so he wanted me to interview people. And I was very happy because I'd already published something about a weird thing that happened the same time as the abduction. So I was interested.
Philip Mantle, he's probably listening right now. So Philip, listen to me. That guy gets him. I don't know how he does it. I don't. They say lightning never strikes twice, right? In Philip's case, he's up to like 13, 14, 15 lives now, where he has been at the center of some of the most important, craziest things in the world of ufology. I don't know how he does it. I don't. And he's just a nice guy. He's, to me, just a nice, normal guy that seems to be in the center of a mess, right? I don't know how he does it. I don't. So, am I understanding you correctly? You're in Missouri. Mom calls, says neighbors are getting chased by UFOs, right? They're keeping their children inside. And that was on October 11th, 1973, same night.
No, October the 11th, she called and said there was something like an explosion. And she kept asking me if I heard it. And I kept telling her she was crazy. But then several days later, she called and said there was this huge wave of UFOs.
Okay, well, same thing. Okay. We're semantics, Irena. See, that's the problem with the Ph.D. and a radio host that has no brain. Okay, so it's semantic, but that's what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
And the same time frame, and you've got to say, well, that's not a coincidence, is it?
No, there seemed to be a huge wave of UFO sightings at that time all over the country and maybe the world, but it may have been the largest such UFO flap ever.
Now, okay, so that's so. What did you do next? Now that you have this information, and did you go, holy crap? Okay, I'm on to something here.
No, at the time I didn't pay attention to it, except I thought my mother must have gone crazy, and I kept wondering why she would do that. But I didn't think about it much until years later. I was at Ohio State, and just for a whim, I decided to go in and see if I could find when that happened. And
no, that's what I'm referring to. When you're at the observatory and you start to make these connections, did you have a holy crap moment then that you were now starting to connect some crazy dots?
No, because I just had I read something about the abduction. I had no interest in it at all. I was interested in the scientific thing of the sound, and it was unidentified. It was a huge sound. It was like, I think it was the second largest ever recorded in extent. And as I kept on studying it, I found 2 seismograph records of it, and that was back in the days when there were sonic booms and things. But this was different because this was reported in newspapers all across the country. It started in Iowa, and it was heard clear of the coast, and it was very widespread, like from New York to Tennessee. And it was nothing like a jet plane or anything, but nobody could explain what caused it. It just was this huge explosive noise that made people run out of their houses and things. But there was no physical evidence of anything. Nobody saw anything, or nothing on radar, no meteors or nothing.
What about the seismic data? What did you get from that?
Well, what I got from that was it was recorded on 2 seismographs, which were about 130 miles away from each other. And so with the newspapers, you weren't real sure of the time or date or anything. But with the seismographs, you could get exact times. So I was able to calculate an exact speed and that sort of thing, which helped me, understand the speed, and the newspaper accounts helped me understand where it was and different things.
And what did you find out? How fast was it moving?
It was approximately 3 times the speed of sound.
About 2,000 miles per hour.
Whatever you remember. But yeah, it's about 3 times the speed of sound, I calculated.
Yeah, 740 times 3, 21, 2250.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah, that's moving. And the locations for those 2 points?
One was in Pennsylvania in College Station. The other was in New York, just the bottom part of New York. Binghampton or something. I can't pronounce it.
Right. And all of this was on October 11th.
Uh-huh. It was,
and your mom heard it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. And she heard it in, I don't know what city in Ohio, but
yeah, right here where I am.
Okay, all right. I don't want to say that out loud on the air, but I did text my mom, by the way. I think you two are going to start hanging out. But Pennsylvania, that's south. And then, so the trajectory, this is what I'm thinking. So the trajectory was north by northeast, right? If it
I tried to get as many newspaper accounts as I could get, and it started in Iowa. It seemed to go a little bit south. It was going east the whole time, but it seemed to go a little bit south, like it went around Chicago. Nobody in Chicago heard it. And then it seemed to go east. But at first it kind of looked like it went a little bit southeast, and then it went east, but it seemed to spread out more as it went across the country too.
Okay, so the event for Calvin and Charles, this was on the evening of October 11th. Could there have been, I know that there were multiple sightings, but could there have been, I like Charles's description of this, by the way, an invasion? It seems like there were multiple ships being sighted around the country at the same time, and Charles and Calvin were just one of them.
Yeah, it seemed like it, because down in Pascagoula, the sheriff's son reported that night on the 11th that there had been 50 reports that he wrote down, and other people in the office, and they were all reporting something strange in the sky. And then when my mother called, she said there was just a huge wave in Ohio, and I think there was a wave all over the place in eastern United States. And I don't know if I can connect the sound to the abduction, but it might have been connected, because there was just a huge wave of UFOs sightings and experiences all through there, including humanoid sightings from people too. And in Columbus, Ohio, they thought it was strange that in Pascagoula there were 50 reports in one night, and other people in the other reports they didn't record. Well, one night after that in Columbus, Ohio, the Columbus Dispatch reported that there were 150 people contacting authorities about UFO sightings. So there was a huge wave in different places. So there was there seemed to be one in Ohio and one Pascagoula, but I imagine there was a lot in between too.
Yeah. And when Calvin was on the show, I want you to talk. We're going to take a break here in a few minutes. But when Calvin was on this show, he said that more and more witnesses were coming forward in Pascagoula, on that night, October 11th, that had seen something. And he had said that, and I want you to expand on this, that across the river from them was a family that saw a blue ship land behind the pier where they were. Do you know who that family was? Were you able to talk to them and see what they had to say about that specific evening?
Yes, I was. And they saw something happening, but they didn't know what it was until they read about the abduction the next day. I mean, they just saw something going on. They didn't know what it was.
But what did they describe? What was it that they saw?
Well, they didn't announce themselves to us. Calvin had given a speech or something. He was on YouTube, and some woman had written in and said, yeah, she knew it was true because her parents saw it. And Philip, who was like Sherlock Holmes, got a hold of her and found out who the parents were and gave me the number. And so I called, and I talked to Jerry and Marie Blair, who were on the other side. And first of all, I talked to Jerry, and he said something about a big splash and something about a blimp. And he was a skeptic. He didn't believe in UFOs or anything. His wife, they were waiting on his supervisor because he and his supervisor were going in on a ship out to the Gulf to attend the oil rigs and things. And his supervisor was late. And so they were sitting there waiting in a car by the pier. And he went to sleep. And Marie was in the car. And she said she saw this thing flying around. But it didn't go anywhere. And there were no landing strips or anything there where they were. And she said she couldn't understand why it was flying around. It didn't go anywhere. And she thought it was an airplane. She thought the pilots were lost or searching for something. She couldn't imagine what they were doing. And then about 9 o'clock, he decided to take his clothes to the car, and he was walking down the pier, and she was walking down behind him, and she saw that this thing flopped up in front of her on the pier that looked like a man. And she had all this emotion about it, and she said, why didn't he come up? And he went back in the water, and she said, why didn't he come up for air? And you could see she was just real tight and emotional about it. Then they walked on down and got in the ship. For some reason, it wasn't until 12 o'clock that night that she came back, and she said she just ran down the pier and jumped in the car. She was so terrified. But she didn't have any idea why she was terrified or, what was going on. And we talked and wrote to each other for about a year or two. And, you could tell she had all this emotion, but she didn't have any idea why she had the emotion. And so anyway, that was where then, I don't know when your break comes in. Should I go on or?
Yeah, keep going. I'm riveted.
Okay.
If you stop right now, Irene, I'm going to jump through this screen and straighten something out, man. That's it. Keep going. Because I remember when Calvin was telling me about this, she was freaked out, and she got a pretty good look at what this thing was. And you're right. She wouldn't walk next to the water after that when she got back.
Yeah, she was very terrified, but we couldn't figure out why. And then later, unfortunately, her husband, who had always been a skeptic, became ill. And I guess he unfortunately knew he was going to die. And right before they put him in a ventilator, and when they do that, you can't talk. Well, he told her that they had been abducted, and that she didn't know that. And then he had been in contact with these beings before and knew them, and sort of made a pact with them that they wouldn't, to protect her, that they had been abducted. And he remembered particular things about it. And he remembered them swimming back across the river. And he remembered this one he called the doctor. And she didn't know why he called it the doctor, but it was like maybe he was physical or did something to him. And so he said, yeah, they had been abducted. And then she didn't remember the abduction, and then he died. And she kind of wanted to do hypnosis and see if she remembered anything else, because her husband told her that he had been in contact with these beings for some time, and maybe that's why they were abducted. And later, we did get Philip got the hypnotist, and he didn't tell her anything about. He was professional about what was going on. Just gave her a date and told Maria to start talking. And she said that that they were in hypnosis. She said they were interested in her eggs and DNA, and that they were producing hybrid like people, and that they wanted to be among us and look like us and hybridize and put aliens here among us. And that's why they were interested in her eggs and her DNA and that sort of thing. And I think she was worried about her husband, because he had been married several times and had kids, and she was worried about her DNA and her kids and all that.
What do we do with this idea? And you're a PhD, veterinary school, and your background with this. Is it possible, because we've heard so much about this, but I feel like I'm narrating Ancient Aliens. Is it possible? I ask you, is it possible for a different species to breed with humans? What has to occur for that? I mean, do we have to have identical or close DNA, but the same amount of chromosome pairs and everything else? Because we just can't, we can't cross-pollinate with fish, or
No, we can't even.
or monkeys or apes. So is it possible for that to happen?
Well, it's not possible, but by our ability. It might be possible by somebody else's ability, but I mean, why do DNA? Why not just come in and look like humans instead of going through all that? So I don't know. That's what she reported, and it'd be really scary, but I don't think anybody would be real concerned because it came in hypnosis. But if it's something that's real, it's very scary.
Yeah, for sure. But as a doctor, do you sit back and analyze this in those terms to see to wonder about what is possible and what isn't?
Well, humans are hybrids. I mean, like I'm, part Neanderthal and different things like that. And so we're, I don't know if we could breed with a Neanderthal now, but we could back then. We might be able to now. But so far as anything else, we wouldn't be able to. But other beings might have different forms of technology where they could, but even if they did, it seems like if they were that advanced, they should be able to just come down and look like us to start with. So I don't know. I mean, it's just, I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And here's we're going to take our break right here, but this has always been my thought about this. If you have an advanced civilization that can get to here from there, that says they're bleeping smart, right? They're we're here, they are way above us as far as technology and the ability to understand and everything else and science and stuff. If they are able to do that, then they know a lot about us. They've been studying us. They know what we like. They know our music and art and entertainment and science and food and how to speak and what scares us. So they're not going to appear like something that would scare the crap out of us. We wouldn't want to talk to them, right? We welcome them into our homes. They would have to appear, and they would have the ability to do that. They would have to appear non-offensive. Maybe, like you're suggesting, they would look just like us. I think that's a pretty good approach because then we won't have the big freak out, right?
Well, maybe we should have the freak out, though. I mean, because we don't know what they are. And
I got to hang out with you, Irena. I'm telling you right now, I got to hang out with you. But that's what would we have to take a break? But I love this conversation. Why would it be advantageous to have a big freak out? Just to wake us up?
Well, we might be calmed by having the impression that they're like us when they're not. And if they're putting on a false face, if they, look like us and we think they're friendly, normal people when they're not anything like us. And just because they're ugly doesn't mean they're bad. I mean, what is ugly to us might be good looking to somebody else. And I mean, we just have our own prejudices and things. And so I don't know.
Yeah. Hey, you know what they say? One man's hamburger is another man's steak.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't know. I would rather have somebody sitting across the table from me that is easy on the eyes. I don't know if I could deal with forearms, right? And I don't know. I wouldn't be as comfortable. Do you remember Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End?
I remember vaguely.
Okay. Well, in that, E.T. just happens to look like the devil. Okay? Hooves, bat wings, red skin, yellow eyes, but a pretty nice guy, right? But he knows what's freaking us out. So he will only speak to us behind a screen. He didn't want to show the world what he looks like because we would lose our minds. That's exactly what it's about. Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, let's take our break right here. Our guest tonight, Dr. Irena Scott. We're talking about Pascagoula, Calvin Parker, Charles Hickson. But when we come back, I'm going to change gears because we've got everything going down today, and I want to know more about her secret life. And we're going to do that when we come back. Stay with us. This is Fade to Black. This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black. Please visit all of our sponsors. We're taking a quick break here. All of the links are below. We'll be right back. Join us November 10th, 11th, and 12th, 2023, live at the Luxor Hotel and Casino on the Las Vegas Strip, as Disclosure Fest Foundation and Fade to Black Radio presents Stairway to the Stars, a Human Origins Science and Technology Expo, with live talks, lectures, and workshops by world-acclaimed researchers and authors featuring topics like human origins, ancient technologies, indigenous teachings, workshops, a mass meditation, yoga and sound healing, music, and so much more. This is Jimmy Church, by the way, and I'll be your host all weekend long. Don't miss our intimate sky watch and meteor shower over the infamous Area 51 airspace in Rachel, Nevada, with special surprise celebrity hosts guiding us through the night. This event will sell out. For more information and tickets, please visit disclosurefest.org. Hi, everybody. Jimmy Church here. Very special announcement, and that is we are shipping Fade to Black t-shirts again. It's been almost 2 years. We did a full upgrade to the website, so you can head over to jimmychurchradio.com. It's all simple to do, and it's right there. Remember, we broadcast 4 nights a week, Monday through Thursday. We bring you the best, the brightest, the most knowledgeable and amazing guests, the best conversations. We do that 4 nights a week. We also do 4 days a week. We broadcast the news, and we do that live too as well. It's not a one-man show. I do it with website support. I do it with producers. I do it with writers and artists. All contribute to the show. The best way to help support what we do here is with the Fade to Black t-shirt. And you can get your Fade to Black t-shirt one of 2 ways. First, go to jimmychurchradio.com, order a shirt. It's really that simple. You're going to get a tracking number, it's going to get shipped, and it's going to get autographed. The second way to get a shirt is with a Game Changer membership. Now, the Game Changer membership not only includes a free t-shirt, but you get a private email to me. You get unlimited commercial-free downloads. You have full access to the website, and everything includes free shipping, and everything is autographed. So help support the show. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. The links are below. You can just go to jimmychurchradio.com, and it's right on the website. So there you go. I'm Jimmy Church, Fade to Black. I'm so excited that I just have one thing to say. Go Beckley Tepe.
This is Robert Clotworthy, the narrator of your favorite television show, Ancient Aliens. And I want to remind everyone that November 10th, 11th, and 12th at the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada, Disclosure Fest is happening. Yes, Stairway to the Stars. And guess what? I'm going to be part of an Ancient Aliens panel. I will be sharing the stage with the biggest stars of Ancient Aliens, Nick Pope, David Childress, Jason Martell, William Henry, all hosted by Jimmy Church. Is it possible that this will be the most amazing convention ever? Could it be that if you don't get your tickets, you'll regret it? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes. See you in Vegas.
River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Dr. Irena Scott is with us. We've been talking about Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson and the Pascagoula abduction case of 1973. And the second half of the show, I'm going to go in some different directions with Irena. And I'm going to start here. When you drive around Wright-Pat, and it's a big base. That's not a small base. That is a big base. And when you drive around it in the community there, you can see the support, the giant American flags, but that's not where my mind goes. My mind goes to its reputation and what goes on at that base and the Foreign Technology Division, the memos from the FBI and Roswell and everything being shipped to Wright-Pat. And it seems that case after case, Irena, over the years, Wright-Pat is brought up more than any other location on planet Earth. Yes, you've been there. You've done work there. Is the secret stuff and today the Aero office is based out of Wright-Pat with Sean Kirkpatrick. That's not a coincidence, right? Is Wright-Pat the keeper of the secrets when it comes to ET and contact?
Well, I imagine if there's secrets, it's probably it and the government in Washington probably know more than anything else, and it's sort of the mecca of UFOs. It's where Project Blue Book took place, and the Foreign Technology Division, which investigated foreign technology, which included UFOs and that sort of thing. So it's where ATIC was, and the Blue Room, and everything else.
Continue. Don't you? You can't stop there. You can't stop there. Okay. So, did you have a chance to poke around? Did you ask any questions?
Yeah, I had a chance because I was on base several times. Once my employees sent me to Wright-Patterson, and most people know about the Air Force Museum, and it's open to the public, but all the rest of it is secured with chain link fences and everything else, and guard posts, and you can't get in the rest of it. And so I was sent into the secured area for a convention, and while I was there, I didn't ask anybody. I just took my camera out and walked around all over the place and took every picture I could think of. And I had a map and things. And so I saw a lot of different buildings and things. And then, like there was this one building, the NASIC building, that was very interesting because it was in the secured area. It was different from all the rest because it had all kinds of monitors all over the place. And I've talked to a lot of people who say this thing is, off bounds to everybody. But anyway, I was in it, and I found out later that it's probably the building is probably what's called the Blue Room.
And its reputation. Tell everybody what the Blue Room is.
Well, the Blue Room, in its reputation, is that it's a place at Wright-Patterson that contains all the UFO secrets and may contain bodies and everything else. And I was in it, and I didn't know it was the Blue Room then, but I knew there was something special about this building. But I attended a UFO meeting in the building.
What?
I was.
What? Wait. What? You attended a UFO meeting in the Blue Room?
Yeah.
Okay. Why?
Well, once I and another person had been in a lecture, and I think it was a Wright-Patterson. I'm not too sure. It might have been a Battelle, but somebody was giving a lecture on UFOs, and we were sitting in the back, and I saw this man in front with all these books, And he was sitting there with all these books, and I told the person, we ought to move down there and see what this man has all these books about. And the man that I was with told me I was crazy. But anyway, I decided to go down and sit beside him. So I did. And I started watching him. And finally we started talking. And it turned out he was the archivist, the historical archivist of Wright-Patterson. And he had done the investigation of, well, after Roswell came out, he'd done the investigation of what went on at Wright-Patterson. And of course, it had been secret, but he was very friendly. And I photographed him at Wright-Patterson and put it on YouTube. As far as I know, it's still there. It wasn't in a classified area, though. It was at Wright-Patterson. But anyway, he invited this other person that was with me and I to go to a meeting in the NASIC building. And so we did. And it was a reunion of Project Blue Book.
And who was there?
There were a lot of military people, and I didn't recognize them. But they showed films. I probably still have it. I don't know if my equipment still shows that type of thing, but they showed pictures of old reunions of Project Blue Book and told they had different people in, such as Ruppelt and Friend and different people. And I think Simpson, who worked at Battelle, was there too, and several other people. And so we went to this meeting, and it was one interesting thing was way back then, they were talking about gun camera photos from jet planes of UFOs. And somebody mentioned it, and somebody in the back started saying, yeah, they have, gun camera pictures of UFOs. And the person that was conducting the meeting just immediately said, there's people in here that don't have clearances, which was us. And so they shut up. And we both thought, if we weren't there, they would have been talking about this camera picture of UFOs and things. And so anyway, it was quite a few years later, I found out that was a Blue Room, but the building itself had impressed me a whole lot right from the first thing when I was there, because it had all these monitoring devices and everything, and none of the other buildings in the security area had anything like that. But when I was in the building, I was escorted, and so I didn't wander around and look for bodies or anything like that.
Yeah. I know that's what you wanted to do. That's what I would definitely try to do that. But when we hear, you can't help those of us that have been, a part of this subject for such a long time, you can't help but wonder about just that, the gun camera footage and what is the evidence that has been compiled over the years. There so much aircraft out there, and it's not just the Air Force, right? It's the Navy, it's the Marines, and the Army, even the Coast Guard. And that's just in this country. You have all the other countries around the world that are doing the exact same thing. And when we see this grainy footage of the Tic Tac and the other stuff that has been, released or leaked out of the Pentagon, you can't help but wonder just that. This ain't what they've got. They've got the real stuff, and they know what's going on, and they're not showing us, and they're not telling us about it. And we, as citizens, have a right to know. There's no reason to hide this from us. And is that what that experience shows you, right? That we absolutely have the crystal clear film and video and radar data and imagery. We're sitting on all of that, and they know this, but they're not telling us. That's what that meeting tells you, right?
Well, it told me before that, because I worked for the DIA before that one of the sections was air order of battle, where we identified all the airplanes over a particular area. And my supervisors had told me that they had turned in a UFO report, that one of the objects they photographed, they reported as UFO. And I saw it and reduced it and got it in stereo and everything. It was on two different pictures. And so they reported as UFO. And their supervisors, which is way up, told them it wasn't. And so they were both very surprised at that, because it was something very unusual, and they had the photographs reanalyzed again, and the people that analyzed it said, no, this was not a spot on the film. That's what the supervisor said, that it was a spot on the film. They said, no, it wasn't. And so, I suspected way back then that things were fishy, that somebody way up ahead probably knew something about it. Of course, it's the government. Maybe the people up above didn't know anything about photography, and they were just the supervisors. But if they knew anything about photography, they'd have known this was not a spot on the film.
Well, let's just, I'm fascinated with this subject. You said it was on two images, you turned it into stereo, right? Okay, what the supervisor says it's a spot on the film, but if you have two separate images to make a stereo image of an object, then it's not a spot on the film. And you know this as an analyst, right?
I'm not the one that turned it in. They were my supervisors, and they just told me about the example that happened. And I looked at the film, but they were very perturbed about it, because their supervisors, which are way up, said it was a spot on the film, and it obviously wasn't.
Well, what did you see? What did it look like to you?
Well, it looked like a round thing with a big dome, and I had to, change the magnification and everything, so I'm not real sure exactly what it was, but in stereo it looked like a round thing with a dome. But it was in this place where nothing like that had been seen before.
Now, was it shot from the ground, or was it shot from the air down?
No, it was satellite photography.
This gets crazy. Okay, so you're looking at a satellite image from the top down at an object that looks circular with a dome. I don't want to use the word flying saucer, but it sounds like that's what you're just, for everybody else to kind of visualize what you are suggesting. Satellite imagery looking back at the surface of the Earth. You're looking for aircraft and other stuff. This is the DIA. And you come across two images, because you made a stereo image of an object that was circular. You're looking at it from above, but that had a dome on top of it.
Well, it seemed to all be the same shade, but there was just the size, is the shape that it looked circular with a dome. I mean, it didn't look like, I didn't see features.
Right. Of course
It was,
not.
it was over water, and it was in different places. And, I think it was two different missions where the satellite goes around for 90 minutes, and it wasn't the same place on both of them. It looked like the same thing, and it wasn't very far away. And with the wave pattern, it wasn't in the water. It was something above the water. But
Keep going, young lady. You got my attention now, right?
It wasn't like it had floated balloons around there or anything. It was just in an area where there were Russian aircraft.
The size, are you able to, because it's stereo, are you able to determine size and altitude?
I could guess at the size and altitude, but I don't think I could, because I don't know how far away from the camera it was. It had to be close to the ground. It was flying, but usually our aircraft that we identified, we could get their size when they were on the ground from the optics, but I don't know exactly where this was. It wasn't, it was where it was in focus, though, but I don't think it was on the ground. I mean, it wasn't on the ground.
Atlantic, Pacific, what part of the globe?
I think it was the Black Sea.
The Black Sea. Huh. Is that the only image that you recall seeing an object like that in your career?
Well, it was the only image that my supervisor saw, and they were, authorities, and they thought it was strange.
I'm sorry, I was clearing my throat. The mute button, it's my best friend. You're just one person looking at this. This must have occurred and continues to occur thousands of times. That's not an exaggeration, is it?
No, I mean, I think, if people see UFOs looking up from Earth, that probably the satellites are probably photographing them too. And with today's technology, they probably have particularly good videos from satellite photography.
Oh, for sure. No question about it. And the other part of this, because we talked about Blue Book, and we can certainly talk more about it. After 1969, when the Air Force closed Blue Book, they had their hearing, they did their thing, and said, okay, nothing to see here. We're not going to study this anymore. Clearly, they have been. And Blue Book in its official capacity for the public, that, okay. But the contact continues. And today, it seems like the Navy wants to talk about it, but the Air Force doesn't. Why do you think that the Air Force has gotten so comfortable with being able to not answer anybody's questions? And that includes the Senate or the president or Congress or anybody else that wants to do an investigation of the IG. The Air Force feels like they're above everybody else and scrutiny and questions. Why do you think that is?
Because they've been lying to everybody for all these years, and the other departments haven't been. That was apparent in the Pascagoula event, because Pascagoula made the news, the national news, twice. Once was the abduction, but another time was just shortly after November the 6th, was a submersible object, a USO, unidentified submarine object, which was seen by 9 people, including 2 Coast Guard officers. And this made the news too. And the sighting was real close to where the abduction was. And this was very taken seriously and investigated by the Coast Guard and the Navy, even though everybody was saying, harassing Calvin and Charles about the abduction. Well, this other USO sighting, which took several hours, and they called the Coast Guard in, and the Coast Guard officers looked at the thing. It was taken very seriously by the Coast Guard and the Navy back then. You could tell a huge difference between the Air Force and the Navy then, because the Navy seriously investigated back in 1973. And so that's still happening now. The Navy is, like the Nimitz and the Princeton, all those ships. The Navy it's Navy information and the DIA videos.
And we have the NRO, right? And so many other agencies that are collecting data. We have all kinds of surveillance satellites, all kinds of sensors that are orbiting the Earth. We're looking out away from the planet as well as looking down onto the planet. So anything that would be out there, anomalous, unidentified or identified foreign adversary, our own, whatever. Everything is looked at and analyzed. And to suggest that that isn't going on is a blatant lie, because that's their job and that's what we pay them to do. And the other problem is, because of the NSA and the NRO, which are huge organizations, and they dwarf things like the CIA and even the FBI for that matter, that they are so comfortable in keeping things ultra and uber secret, including their own methods, that we have to somehow get to that and get at them and get to their information. But they're too comfortable in not cooperating. And that is a problem, isn't it?
Sure is.
Yeah, well, no, continue.
No,
Go
continue. I didn't have anything to say.
Okay. Because when we look back, and I've been reading J. Allen Hynek's books that were written in the mid-'70s. He was clearly an angry young man. He had his hands tied. And even if he had an interest in a case, they told him to squash it and to come up with something convenient to present to the public. And after Blue Book closed down and he started to reveal this stuff. Now, I'm not saying that, and I know Paul Heinik pretty well, and I've talked to him about the subject. I'm not saying that J. Allen Hynek flip-flopped, but certainly in his own writing, he says there's something going on here. We have to apply the science. This isn't something that you can just explain away as planet Venus or swamp gas. These are his own words, right? And here we are in 2023, just now coming around to publicly taking that position. Why did it take so long?
Well, he started out as a professor at Ohio State University, and Wright-Patterson is not too far from, like about 80 miles or so from Ohio State, and they wanted somebody like an astronomer, a big authority, to quash everything. Like if a UFO landed in your backyard and you saw a little green man, well, he was supposed to come by and say, yeah, you saw Venus, you're having hallucinations. And so that's what they hired him for, and that's apparently what he thought he was doing. But he was scientific, and he's listened to the actual people describing things instead of, the authority telling him what he was supposed to say. And so, eventually, being a scientist, he came to a different conclusion. And also, they were selecting the cases they gave him and not including the best cases and just giving him ones that weren't, real good.
Do you think that if he had a choice, that he would have pushed back more during Project Blue Book? Do you think that he just gave in to the pressure? Because he was doing just that. He's out there, especially like a case like Lonnie Zamora, right? And you look at that case specifically where he's out there in the field. He knows that there's a cover-up. And the Lonnie Zamora specifically, that case was something that Project Blue Book ended up putting a lot of resources into. They wanted to see if NASA was test flying a lander, right? The lunar lander. They looked into that.
They had rockets that could land on their nozzle back then.
Yeah. They looked into the university hoax, the prank idea that was thrown out there. They looked at every angle that they could, and they just, they were able to scratch things off of the list. The things that were being suggested by the Air Force and the government about what actually happened out there in New Mexico. And that was one of the cases where I think where Heinik went, oh, you know what? There's a cover-up going on here, and this isn't cool. But he didn't push back, right? Do you think that he would have had a different way of handling it if given the choice?
No, I think they'd have fired him if he pushed back very far. And I think what he did was not push back. He didn't lie though, but he waited and collected as much information as he could and then did something later, because I think he would have lost all the information that he was finding out, because they would have probably got rid of him, hired, somebody else that would lie if they, if he pushed back too far. It would be my opinion. I don't think he could do anything about it.
Do you think, well, we know historically that there may be a gap there, but do you think that the Project Blue Book, not in the public sense, but Project Blue Book continued under another name and that wasn't revealed to the public? We know about ATIP and what was revealed, recently, but there's a gap there between 1969 and 2014, right? That's a pretty big gap. Was the Air Force always investigating UFOs during that period?
I would guess that somewhere up above they were, but I don't know if it's the Air Force or the CIA or exactly what, but I think something would have obviously been, well, when I was in that NASIC building at Wright-Patterson, I asked the archivist, what do they do here that's so secret? And he said it's satellite photography, the same thing I'd worked on the DIA. So that's one thing. They probably, and they had monitors all over the place. So I assume there was a lot of storage down underneath it and everything else. But I would guess that they were collecting data somewhere. But
let's go back to the archivist for a second. It's actually right here in my notes. I said circle back to the archivist, and I hadn't had a chance to do that yet. He said that he was researching and archiving Roswell and Wright-Pat's connection to Roswell. In the mid 1990s, two reports came out, and one was Roswell case closed by the Air Force, and the other one was the General Accounting Office, the GAO, did their research into Roswell. Two things resulted into that. 4 different stories came out off of that, all of them completely wrong, trying to explain away Roswell. But the problem with that is the GAO, the General Accounting Office, right? The authority was told by everybody that they approached that all of the records were destroyed, all of the phone records were destroyed, all of the billing records were destroyed, all of the shipping receipts were destroyed, that there is nothing about Roswell that we can show you, right? And it's their job to audit something. And that cannot be the case. And if that is the case, what was this archivist collecting if the GAO, right, can't uncover stuff? What was it that the archivist had?
Well, I think he was a good guy, but I think he was under security, and he may have just been giving us funny answers so that we would have more questions, because I'm sure, if he knew everything, he couldn't say it. But on the other hand, he was supposed to investigate whether we had technology that came from UFOs. And I think we developed our technology ourselves. I don't know if it came from UFOs, but I think, scientists spent a lot of time developing the technology. And so I don't necessarily think it did come from UFOs. And I don't know if UFOs are technological anyway, or whether there's something we just totally don't understand. But I think he was an honest person. I think he was under security, but I had a real good impression of him.
And when you say that he was he a government employee?
Yeah.
Okay, a government employee that was tasked with looking into whether we were backwards engineering alien technology. Am I understanding you right?
Uh-huh.
Well, the question is why, and who would give him that type of assignment?
The government. That's what people were saying, that a lot of people have said in writing every place else that we got our technology from UFOs, like CD.
Well, look at David Grush's testimony in Congress.
Yeah.
He said exactly that. Well, so this archivist who you met, he's the one that took you on base to the Blue Book reunion.
Mm-hmm.
So he had security clearances and he had the credentials. Sounds like he was in the Air Force if he was able to get on and off of the base, right?
Yeah. He got us into that building. He had high clearances, and he was doing that investigation. We wrote it up in the Ohio UFO Notebook. The other person and I wrote a whole lot of detail about everything that he said and about the meetings that we went to and everything else.
The testimony of David Grush says just that, right? It confirms what that archivist was chasing down. Do you think? Okay, let's suppose a couple of things, because I've been thinking about this a lot. David Grush goes in front of Congress and says, okay, I've got the addresses, I've got the locations, I've got the names. Take me into a skiff. I'll tell you where the bodies are at. I'll tell you where the craft are at. And I'll tell you which companies are backwards engineering alien technology. Those are his words out of his mouth, right? Under oath. Well, isn't that tipping the hat to those that would have this technology? And if he did give up an address and somebody shows up at that address and they open up the hangar doors, it's empty because they knew that they were coming, right? That the jig was up. Isn't that the problem with Grush's testimony? And certainly with this archivist, he would be up against the same thing, I would think.
Well, the archivist was back a few years ago, and he was just telling us. He wasn't telling the nation and all that. But David Grush was giving you secondhand information too. They had the two pilots who were giving firsthand information. They said they saw this. He was saying, well, people told him that. So he didn't verify anything. He was just saying, well, this is what people told him.
I don't want to debate you on this.
Okay.
But that isn't exactly how it went down, from my understanding. Grush turned over documents to the IG's office so he could get his whistleblower status, and said, this is what's going on. This is what I have acquired. So it's not just, and also what is firsthand and what is secondhand? Secondhand is when somebody says something to somebody and then somebody says something to somebody else. That's secondhand. But when somebody is a witness to something and then tells somebody something, that's firsthand information. So that's what Grush is passing on, the information and the names of people in the position to share this information firsthand. That's the way that I understand it. The secondhand has never come up with Grush. It's always firsthand and documents. So for David to suggest that he could go into a skiff and provide these documents and provide these names, that's all first person, firsthand sourcing.
Yeah, I don't know. I just was guessing that the government probably knows more than they say.
Right. And so, and I guess, but this goes back to my point, Irena, and you've always, in your career, you're in a very, very unique position. One that I could sit and just talk to you for hours on these subjects. And you were there. The point about Grush that I think is so important is that it's not whether he is providing photographs and he saw the bodies himself and he touched and he talked to an ET. It's not about that. It's to provide those that are elected officials that are in control of not only investigations, but money and budgets and the law, to provide them the information to go and get their job done. And that's where Grush's testimony is so important. And I think that's where we are at today. I know that it was last week. I think they finally had access to a skiff. But how much of this is turned into a shell game since then? Let's talk about Wright-Pat. Okay, dudes, did you hear Grush's testimony? Empty the warehouse, right? Send that stuff to New Zealand. We've got to get it out of here. And that's the part that I appreciate David Grush and everything that he has done and everything that he has said. But it tips the hat. It gives everybody an opportunity to move any evidence that they would be sitting on. That's just my opinion, but that's where I'm at with this.
Well, if Wright-Patterson wanted to make lots of money, they could just open up all their UFO information and have tours and make a zillion billion, dollars. So that was a joke.
Not really. I mean, not really. That's a great observation. In that, is the public ready for something like that? Right? Where you have a government-sponsored diorama at Disney World or Universal Studios, right? Knott's Berry Farm, right? You've got Kings Island, right? Is it still open? Is Kings Island still there?
I think so.
Yeah, the amusement park. Man, I've been there so many times when I was a kid. To have a UFO diorama sponsored by NASA, right? Are we ready for that? Are we at that point in history where, you go to the Natural History Museum, right? And you look at Neanderthal, right? And, with his club and his cave and his wife and a couple of kids. And the next diorama is Irena Scott shaking hands with an alien gray, right? Are we ready for that?
Well, I think the thing that happened to me way back when I was a kid educated me in some way, because we just saw a little thing in our room, but we both woke up at the same time for no reason at all. We had no idea how it got in our room, and then we became terrified at the same time. But all we saw was this little thing. And it made me think that this phenomena, the UAP, can take any appearance that it wants to.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And which goes back to my point earlier that, of course, the question. Now, okay, I know your background and your education. So let me throw this out there. In 10,000 years, are we going to look like us today? No, I don't think so. We're going to evolve as a species. We are. We're going to change. And I don't know what those changes are going to be, but we have to understand that ET could appear to us in any an infinite amount of forms. Like for you and your sister, it happened to be an energy source floating around the room, right? And why wouldn't we evolve into that someday too? We have to look at it that way, don't we?
But they may be totally different from us, and it may not be technology. It may be just that we're real limited. We are not the only intelligent life in the universe, as they say. All that we may be little tiny, just like chemicals to somebody else that's more advanced, just like a chemical reaction. I mean,
yeah. Well, why not? Why not? We would appear like bacteria, right? like bacteria. And if you were walking down the street and you look down and you see some kind of growth, on a puddle of water, you're not going to stop and go, "Hey, I'm going to teach you French today." No, you have to wait a million years before that bacteria grows some legs. And just maybe that's the way we appear to some advanced civilizations. That we are as advanced as a single-celled animal. I'm okay with that. It bums me out. But if something is a million years ahead of us, how do they look at us? How would we look at us in 10,000 years? Or would we 10,000 years from now? I mean, look how we look at Cro-Magnon, right? So 10,000 years from now, do we look back at this crazy radio host and this author of UFO material, right, as intelligent? Maybe not. Maybe it's I don't know. And that's the frightening part about all of it. We like to think that where we are today, we're so smart. And we've really only had 300 years of science. That's it.
Yeah, to say, we're the only intelligent life in the universe. Well, nobody's been out in the universe. I mean, we've just been here on Earth anyway.
Do you think that our government knows that there is life maybe on Mars, that there may be something on the far side of the moon, that there may be something living on Europa, orbiting Jupiter, but they're sitting on that information?
I don't know whether the government knows that much about it or not. I think they have good photography and that sort of thing. But this may be beyond the government. It's just unknown.
Well, it's sort of, but I mean, sort of. I think that is something that they could use to ease ET contact into the conversation, right? You can't jump from 0 to Calvin Parker. You have to have something in between. And maybe it would be microbial life or something like that to interject that into the conversation, because it would, you know what I mean? The slap to the face, it would ease the pain a little bit. And I think that may be the approach.
Yeah, I think with some people it wouldn't bother them, but with other people it just, just ruin their lives. But it's probably something that people need to think about.
Now, your website is irenascott.com. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, you got, yeah. Well, I'm going to include God as a Woman, by the way. Books about contact, and you've got all of your material there. Where can everybody reach out to you, Irena?
I'm on Facebook under the name Irena Scott, and people can ask me questions on Facebook.
Fascinating conversation tonight. Thank you so much, and thank you for your contribution to this community. It was just absolutely amazing for me tonight. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much.
The
and thank
best.
you for everything you've been doing. That's great.
My job is easy. You've got the rough one, and you've been doing it for a very long time, and don't stop, okay?
Well, you've got the rough one. Congratulations and good luck.
Thank you, Irena. Behave and be well. Now go hang out with my mom, okay? She's going to text you.
Okay, great.
All right. Irena Scott. It's irenascott.com. Her books. We have Beyond Reasonable Doubt, the Pascagoula Alien Abduction. You've got Beyond Pascagoula. You've got Sacred Corridors. Yeah, that's a book about Project Blue Book. Inside the Lightning Ball, UFOs Today. And she's also got a book about Calvin Parker and others. So go to irenascott.com and check out everything that she has. And for me, I am going to, I'm going to try to take the weekend off and not work, but I have to. I'm going to work all weekend. You guys behave and be well. I'll see you right back here on Monday. Very excited. Now, go. This is just about your last chance to go and get tickets for Stairway to the Stars. That is in Las Vegas, November 10th, 11th, and 12th. It will be kicking off 1 week from tomorrow, and I will see you out there. I've got links below and a promo code for you to get your tickets. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you to Dennis and Kevin. Thank you, Genocide. Thank you, Bill. You guys are the best. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2023 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Everybody have a great weekend. I'll see you right back here on Monday. Go back, Lee Tappy.